before he ever took the stage as the host of the Bear Bryant Show, Steadman Shealy was leading Alabama to a national championship. Steady, smart, unshakable under center, he wasn't just the quarterback of the 1979 Crimson Tide. He was the on-the-field extension of Coach Bryant's will, the embodiment of discipline, precision, and quiet leadership. From Dothan, Alabama to the pinnacle of college football, Steadman Shealy helped guide one of the greatest teams in Crimson Tide history, one that finished a perfect 12-0 and sealed Coach Bryant's sixth national championship. Today we go behind the face mask and behind the microphone as Steadman shares what it was really like to quarterback the Tide, to learn from Coach Bryant, and to later carry those lessons into life and leadership beyond the field. This is Crimson Chronicles, the stories behind the legends told by the men who lived them.
Thank you, Rick. Our guest today is my longtime friend, Steadman Shealy. Steadman, a native of Dothan, started playing quarterback in the 5th grade, and as quarterback for Dothan High School, he led his team to the state 4A finals his junior and senior seasons. And during his senior season in 75, he hit 63% of his passes for 1,200 yards and added 800 yards on the ground. Following his senior season in 75, he was named All-Area, All-State, and Super All-State. He also earned letters in basketball, baseball, and in track as a sprinter, a high jumper, a long jumper, and a triple jumper. Steadman signed with Alabama and Coach Bryant in 1976, played on the JV squad in 76, then for the 77 season and the 78 national championship team, he was the backup quarterback to Jeff Rutledge. The 79 season, though, was his time to shine, and he led Alabama to an undefeated 12-0 record in the SEC and national championship, culminating in a come-from-behind 25-18 win over Auburn and a 24-9 victory over Arkansas in the 1980 Sugar Bowl. During that championship senior season, he ran Alabama's wishbone offense to perfection and was the team's leading rusher with 791 yards on 152 carries. Through the air, he was 45 of 81 for 717 yards and 4 touchdowns. Upon graduating Alabama, he entered law school at Alabama and remained on the football staff as a graduate assistant for the 80, 81, and 82 seasons. And during the 82 season, which was Coach Bryant's final year at Alabama, Steadman was the host of the Bear Bryant Show. Following law school, Steadman, along with his wife Ann Wood Shealy, who was a gymnast at Alabama in the late 70s, moved to Dothan, where he began his long career as an attorney. Today, he and Ann split time between Dothan and Tuscaloosa. They have 5 children, one of whom, Jacqueline, was a 3-year letter-winning gymnast for Alabama in 2007, 8, and 9. Steadman, what a resume. It's great to see you.
Hey, thank you, Tommy. That was mighty kind. A lot of those I'd about forgotten about. I guess it's...
Oh, we're going to remind you a lot of things.
You're my age, you kind of appreciate it more.
Yes.
Well, Steadman, I think a lot of our guests find out that Tommy knows more about them than they know about themselves, and you're not alone in that. But, man, we're so glad you're with us and just really appreciate you taking your time to share your story with us and with our listeners. And so I just want to start at the beginning. Growing up as a kid in Dothan during the heyday of Alabama football, I mean, Alabama was the powerhouse. There were so many young men in Alabama that dreamed of playing for Coach Bryant, but there were only a few that really got there. When you were growing up in Dothan, who were some of the people that inspired your football journey and were your inspiration to do what you went on to do?
Well, my junior high coach was Coach Hardy, and I was fortunate enough to start as an 8th grader. Back then, they didn't have a lot of rules on age, so I was a little 13-year-old playing against 16-year-olds. So it was interesting, but that's how I got started, and then went to Dothan High as a 10th grader. I always say I felt like I grew into my feet because I always had feet, and then next thing you know, I got where I could really run the football. It was like overnight. all of a sudden I had moves I never knew were possible. And I started as a junior at Dothan High. We just had an unbelievable football career in high school. We had great defenses. My junior year, we started 0-3. One of the games we played Americas, who was number one in the country. And then we won the rest of our games. And next thing you know, believe it or not, by a miracle of God and his blessing, we were playing in the state finals against Murray Legg. But an interesting story happened. We went up to practice at Legion Field, and the whole team got food poisoning. And so everybody was sick before the game except me, because I don't know how it happened, but my parents were with me, and we ended up eating somewhere else, which was fortunate for me, because I'm staying in a room with 3 other guys, and they're all so deathly sick. I didn't even know how we were able to play the game. It rained during the game, but we ended up losing 10-7, and we had a pass in the end zone that just tipped off Greg Ramsey's hands, and we lost. And then the next year we started 2-2, and then won the rest of our games, and we're back playing Major Ogilvy in Mountain Brook, and we lost 29-23, and we were up in the game 23-21. But my senior year, we had Coach Krill, who was a college coach. He came to be our coach. And my junior year was Coach Sermon. And they did an incredible job of just changing. And that's why I think we did well my junior year. But then my senior year, I always laugh because we were putting in our last bit of offense for the state finals. I mean, that's how complicated our offense had become, because we had such a great coach. He was very offensive minded. But I was number 2 my 2 years in high school. And then my sophomore year, we played Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl. And you could be number 2, but you had to play a lot. And I was the runner, and Jeff was a great passer. And the wishbone was my kind of offense, my style of play. And we were number 2 again. So we dedicated ourselves the next year, and we're fortunate enough to be number 1 my junior and senior year. So
yeah. Well, backing up to when you were still in Dothan, Alabama fans always wonder how the state's top players make the decision of where they go to college. For you, faith was a big part of it. Tell us about your recruiting experience, especially who recruited you to Alabama, and were you a lock to go to Alabama from the start? And how did your faith play into that decision?
Not at all. I was recruited by a bunch of the Ivy League schools because I had good grades and that kind of thing. But Mississippi State, Auburn, and Alabama were the primary schools that recruited me. And I'll never forget, Coach Barfield, who was Auburn's head coach, was in my living room. Vince Dooley, who was Georgia's head coach, was outside in his car. And Coach Bryant called. And I'll never forget, my mother opened the door. I went in there. I had no idea. I mean, you got Coach Barfield and one other coach just sitting there talking. And then I get on the phone with Coach Bryant, and here's how Coach Bryant recruited. Steadman, what jersey have you always wanted to wear? My sister, Madeline, was a Bear girl. All the ladies had graduated from Alabama and Alabama Law School. And so I kind of mumbled around. I said, the Crimson. He goes, well, what's your problem then? And I kind of mumbled around. I didn't know what to say. And he said, well, if you'll commit, I'll personally come down and sign. Now, most people don't realize that was a very big deal. For Coach Bryant to actually go and sign a player was amazing. And so I didn't commit that night. But that next Saturday, my dad and I went out to our friend of our family's farm, and we just were in prayer all day. And God just pointed me to Alabama. But that really wasn't where I wanted to go, because Alabama had signed the top 5 quarterbacks in the state the year before. Auburn said, hey, you come here, you'll be number 2 when you walk in. Mississippi State, Rocky Felker lived with me in Dothan. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd gone to a camp there, and I just loved them. And my mom's half Mississippi, and so I just, it was just one of those situations. Georgia, I couldn't quite get my arms around. It's a little too far. I mean, I had a good trip. They had the best food of anybody. That's the thing. And then, but in being in prayer, and God directed me to Alabama. And I'll never forget, I had so many people, especially at my church, say, well, you probably never get to play. And I said, well, where God wants me is where I want to go.
Mm.
So that's how my recruiting went. And as we go a little, I'll tell you a couple of unbelievable stories about how God intervenes, no matter how we can maybe want to go in the wrong direction sometimes. But Coach Bryant did come down. He did sign me, and it was on Wolf Radio, which is about the only radio station, but it's a huge station here, and it's the biggest deal in Dothan. And that's how I got to Alabama.
Well, let me ask you this as a follow-up. When Doug Barfield was in your living room and Coach Bryant called, had Coach Bryant had a spy out in the bushes that called him and let him know that Coach Barfield was in your house?
I always say yes. One of the coaches knew that they were at my house, and they had Coach Bryant call me.
Yeah. Well, so you're headed to Alabama. You reported as a true freshman in '76, and you're a quarterback, right? So naturally, you start out at quarterback, right?
Hey, the second day I'm there, Coach Bryant calls me in his office and says, hey, we're going to move you to free safety. Okay. Because in all honesty, one of our safeties had gotten hurt just right out of the shooting. So I went over to free safety, and I was pretty good in shorts. I was fast, I was scared, I was quick. It was a disaster. Because when we put on the pads, back then they were doing all these junction blocks, Calvin Culliver, and then our fullback was Johnny Davis, 6'3", 240. And I'll never forget, I hit him one time and bounced off. Almost, they had to carry me off the field. We had Bull in the ring. I'll never forget, for some reason I was spinning around and I pointed to the guy that was the biggest guy, and he came and hit me, and blood went everywhere. Next thing you know, I'm in the train. But this is how I started at Alabama. The worst thing that happened was we had a big scrimmage. I did terrible. I'll never forget Lewis Campbell. He got in my face and said things that, and he's a great guy, but coaching B, and it was awful. So when I went home that night, I called my parents and I said, I'm coming home. I said, this isn't for me. They said, that's fine, we'll support you, but we want you to do one thing. We want you to pray about it. Well, I wasn't in the praying mood, in all honesty. But I said, Lord, if you don't want me to go home in the morning, you bring a coach to talk to me in the morning, or I'm going home. Well, in the morning was Sunday morning. And most of the time the coaches don't come over there every morning. But one of them did, talked with me, shared some things with me. And I'll never forget, I said, Lord, you confirmed again you want me to be here at Alabama. And so that Monday, after God answered my prayer, and you think something big's going to happen, something big did happen. I went from number 2 free safety to number 9 quarterback. In fact, they had to write my name in. It was so over there.
What color was that jersey, Steadman? We hear about the colored jerseys. What color was ninth string?
It was yellow, but when you're ninth string, nobody else appreciates it's yellow. And I would run gauntlet against Bumhire, Gus White, Charlie Hanna. And I'll never forget, one day I was running gauntlet, but I was so quick. Really, I was so scared that when we would do the gauntlet, and I went through all 3 of them, they never touched me. So, of course, Coach Donahue moved in whatever they had to kick. So all 3 of them impaled me. I couldn't breathe for a week because they were going to make a mistake. That's just the way football was. It was who could survive then. And so my freshman year, I played on the freshman team. I never traveled. I was kind of a dummy. I'll never forget, I was on the I did the punt team. I'm a scholarship quarterback. And my old buddy Gus White from Dothan, Alabama, put me in the bushes. He hit me so hard. They had to get the managers to get me out. It's just, I know you can't make it up, but it's what happened. And I'll never forget, Leroy Cook had us go. He said, now, this is to run after practice. He said, now, y'all run down there and get a leaf. So we ran down there to get a leaf, brought it back. He said, now go put it back. And then on Saturday mornings, we would get up at 6 a.m. and go run gassers until we were all sick. And then they'd look at us and say, now y'all go to the game. Well, nobody wanted to go. We were about dead. And that was at the end of the week. And so it was a great experience because it taught me a lot of humility. Your teammates know what you're going through. I didn't walk in there and set the world on fire. I did just the opposite. And then my sophomore year comes around, and I know I'm going to be redshirted because we had Rutledge and Jack O'Rear, and we had Kevin. He was the third. Jack tears his knee up in the fall practice. I forgot about spring practice. I will say I was able to, because I was faster. I was quicker. So that spring I did shine some, but I still knew I was going to be, it didn't matter. In fact, I scored 3 touchdowns, was in every paper all over the state in the spring of my freshman year. And I was the only quarterback to dress out in that following Monday. But that was just Alabama. A statement. And they did. And so the neatest story about how God intervenes in spite of ourselves. He's always faithful. Work it out. And I start playing my sophomore year, and I play more and more every game. It got better, but the second game, I play against Nebraska, which we got only 25 interceptions.
Yeah, I remind him of that quite often.
It was my first time to ever be on an airplane. I know I'm not going to play. I'm down at the other end, and at halftime, I thought I'd warm up a little bit, and the ball hit me right here on the finger. I couldn't even hardly move it. And so I'm way down here, and all of a sudden, I'll never forget, Pat Thomas runs down there and grabs me and says, Steadman, Coach. I thought I was in trouble because I wasn't paying attention. The next thing you know, they dragged me all down. I told Coach. I look up at him, and he looks down at me, and he says, son, we're going to put you in the game. I looked at him. I said, Coach, you don't want to do that. And he said, go take some snaps. Well, every time the ball would hit my finger, it was killing me. Dwight was the center. So I run out onto the field, and I'll never forget thinking, national TV. This is great. I'm in the huddle. I call the play. We go up to the line. They want me to run the option. My feet didn't work. My body didn't work. My head didn't work. Nothing worked. All I did is take a snap and fall down. That's my first play at the University of Alabama. That's how I started. And I jump up, hoping my teammates didn't see it. And there were some things said to me in the huddle, and it wasn't Bible reading, I can tell you that. I had Ozzie Newsome, Johnny Davis, Tony Nathan, all these All-Americans. And to make a long story short, I think I ended up gaining about a half a yard. I didn't play anymore. Jeff had a terrible day. Of course, Jeff and I sat together on the plane because nobody even talked to us. We lose. And then that next Sunday, we get back in. I go to church. Nobody speaks to me at church. It was awful. And then when I go into the room, back then, the board, we had a chalkboard. It kind of tell you what you're going to do. And the only thing on the chalkboard was Shealy, report for practice. That was it. So I'm the only guy that goes out and practices that Sunday. Well, they wanted me to work. I did have a little help from a center and a back. So that next week, we go play Vanderbilt. Well, let me say this. It's the only game, the Vanderbilt game was the only game that Johnny Davis ever lost a yard. They would hit you. They weren't that good, but they would hit you. So next thing you know, Coach Bryant puts me in the game. But this time, I do it perfect. I run the veer, read my way out. Everything's looking great. And then I can feel a flash coming. And so I pitched it to Major. Boom. Turned my head. You talking about targeting? You've never seen a targeting would hit me. Ronnie Meyer, number 19 from Marianna, Florida, hit me right here in the head. And the picture went all over the country, UPI. Some guy caught it, and it somehow went all over. I used to carry it around and show little kids. I'm laying there, and my head's just going, woo, 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 woo. I'm laid out in the field. Everybody thought I was dead. But because of the... I never forget Coach Goosetree, bless his heart. He comes out there, and back then they let you use that smelling, put it down there, and he goes, are you alive in there? And so they grabbed me up, carried me off the field, and here was the concussion protocol. 1, 2, 3. All right, I think you'll be all right. And in all honesty, I went back in the game and played the second half. I don't remember it. That's how my career started at Alabama.
Well, I told Major this. I think I met you on that trip to Lincoln because Coach Bryant allowed me as the Crimson White sports editor to travel with the team to the Nebraska and Southern Cal games that year. And what a great trip. And that was the first time that I really realized what a national figure Coach Bryant was. Because when y'all went to work out on Friday afternoon in the stadium, the buses pulled up near the stadium and the Nebraska fans were lined up just to get a glimpse of Coach Bryant. And that was the first time I realized, because I'd grown up in the state and he was our guy and the TV wasn't like it is today. And that was the first time I realized what a national impact he had on college football. And it stayed with me forever since then. But you talked about your junior varsity squad and your sophomore year, but when it came down to it, what was it like to have that crimson jersey on, just to play for Alabama?
It's the greatest thing in the world. And especially when all of a sudden they realize you might be playing quarterback. Different reporters say, well, what's it like knowing that Joe Namath, Kenny Stabler, all the greats had worn this jersey, Pat Tramble, all the guys that we had heard of, Scott Hunter, Sloan. It was amazing. And then it starts to sink in and you go, wow, what an honor. What an honor. If I had to sum it, it's an honor to wear that crimson. There's nothing like it. And even to this day, when I see them run out in the crimson jersey or even the white jerseys, I just go, golly. And just having a thankful spirit that I was able to be a part of all that.
So, Steadman, you've talked a lot about your faith, about how your faith was always a part of your journey at the University of Alabama and been a part of your life. Keith Pugh told us about, in an interview that we did with him last year, about a Bible study that Robert Fraley led in Bryant Hall. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that time had on your life and some of the guys that were a part of that Bible study you were a part of there while you were a student?
Well, I think Robert was leading the study before I got there. Okay. But once I got there, we had a man named Brent Nelson with Athletes in Action. He came over and started discipling all of us. And we started having Bible study all over the dorm. I was real involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, but also FCA. FCA was just a huge part. In fact, that's my first date with Amos. An FCA meeting. The atmosphere was to see God continue to work through all this, where this day almost every player that was there during my time has found Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And a lot of that had on the team. He worked in all of our lives. It was such a big, all of us. Jeff was a strong believer, and Keith was amazing. Just what a blessing to me. I can never thank him. He was such a great roommate and a great role model, and wide you could hope for. He was that. I'll never forget when Tommy Wilcox got there, and Tommy was a little rough, and we got a hold of him. just began to work in his life, and really all of them. And I think Rich to tell you there was a lot of see a part of it, not at that time. But God, hey, that's how God starts working on people's lives. He begins to move, and once He takes over, He takes over.
Believe me, Rich is there now, brother. He's gone from that foundation back then to a skyscraper right now.
Amen
He is
to
a
that.
great leader of men and chairman of the deacons at First Baptist Church, and I'm so proud of Rich and with the Lord.
Flipping back over to the football field, when you finally took the field under Coach Bryant for the first time, what was that moment like? You talked about his presence and his aura. I think every player that we've had on through this whole series of podcasts that played for Coach Bryant all talk about his presence, his aura, just the way that had demanded attention. What was it for it to be playing for him?
It was pretty incredible. And it got more incredible the more I got to know him. Of course, quarterbacks got to know Coach Bryant a lot better than anybody, because he'd always say, I want to take a walk with the quarterbacks. He'd tell funny stories, saying, now, Steadman, I want you to run the ball. I always tell the Kenny Stabler story. I don't know how many times where Kenny threw the ball out, 4th and 1, stop. And he said, no, you're down and distant. And he'd go through all this every week. But there'd always be a little twist or something, but describe what it's like to be in his presence, because he had an aura about him that you were ready to run through the wall. It didn't matter. See, Coach Bryant was the best at taking Steadman Shealy. Athletes got some ability, become better. You thought you were better than you were. He was the master of that. And he'll be the first to tell you he struggled coaching the very talented guys. Because it was all about hard nose, get after it. The guys that got to play on Saturday were a lot of times the guy that survived all up to that time. It was amazing. And I got to coach with him. I had the most powerful non-paying job in America. I was Coach Bryant's eyes and ears. Look at 315, the guy with the headphones, that's me. I got to know him even better just through all that. What'd be hilarious is when he'd start coaching me and I wasn't even playing. And he actually would sometimes. When you're in the middle of it, you don't appreciate it as much. Look back in, and you really realize, oh my gosh, how blessed, how fortunate to just be around. And a lot of people don't know it. Coach Bryant came to my wedding, and Coach Moore came to the wedding. Such a blessing.
Yeah.
So,
Steadman, before you became the starter, we talked about you being Jeff Rutledge's backup for 2 years. But in the spring of '78, you had a serious knee injury. What happened, and how did you get back for the '78 season? Because that's a short time between spring and the fall.
that was another miracle, because I had the old-timey surgery. They cut you, big cut, both cartilages replaced, anterior cruciate. Then I got an infection, a staph infection. Had fever 5 weeks. Went from 190 to 160. Do y'all know how long it took me to finally get to 100? It was amazing. I was faster, quicker, and running the offense. Everything couldn't be going better. I finally grew into myself. I finally got big and strong and ready. Able to, in the 8th practice, the back missed the block, and I probably thought I was quicker than I was, and boom, next thing you know, I tear my knee up. I have to have surgery. I get an infection. Basically, all the coaches wrote me off except one, Coach Bryant. And as we go on a little, I'll tell you the funniest story you've ever heard in a little bit. But Coach Bryant believed, and so after major knee surgery, I played in 5 months and a major infection, and played all but one game. And we went on and won the national title. And I always would get sick before the game for some reason, my sophomore year and my senior year. My junior year, I never got sick before a single game. And they used to call it, they would give me a Dramamine, and Jeff and Keith, we'd always have prayer before the game. And they'd say, yeah, the pill that passeth all understanding. But I would just get so amped up. But my junior year, I never got a single game because I felt like every game was by the grace of God because the coaches weren't even included. And I'll never forget when Coach told everybody that I was going to play against Missouri the second game. I hadn't practiced. And then we're out there in Missouri, and I'm standing around, and I'm right up there. But I didn't know if I was going to play or not. But I'll never forget Coach Bryant said, Mal, I'm going to put Steadman in. And you're right there. And Mal goes, no, Coach, you don't need to do that. So he put me in the first play. Now, remember, I hadn't been hit or anything. I gained 9 yards, and when I got hit, I thought I died. But I let him do a field goal, and then the rest was I played every game thereafter. And but that's just God's faithfulness. I mean, he was so faithful to me to allow me that opportunity to be a part of something big because I really felt like we were going to win the national title my junior year. When we got beat by USC, just barely, you didn't know, but we went on. And see, what most people don't realize, I never lost an SEC game. 3 years.
Wow.
We never lost an SEC game. And I had the opportunity to play with some of the greatest players who were amazing and the greatest coach. And Coach Moore was a great coach. He was called the Wishbone Wizard, and we were fine-tuning the wishbone because you had to. Everybody was coming up with all these crazy defenses.
Well, by 79, Steadman, Jeff was gone and on to the NFL and played 14 years in the NFL. Alabama had just come off back-to-back 11-1 seasons. We talked about that. Won the SEC twice, won the national championship in 78. But in 79, it was your team. You were the starting quarterback. What do you remember most about that season and about that 79 national championship?
For me personally, it was a relief to finally say, hey, I'm going to start, and this is my team. We had such a seasoned group of guys, that I was a part of. And, of course, we had the greatest center that ever played football, was all 4- and 5-year guys. And then the 2 backs were juniors. That was Major and Billy Jackson. And then had Steve Whitman as fullback. He was amazing. Everybody had been around so long, you didn't have to coach us, that group. We'd been through national titles, been through the biggest games, been our non-conference games through my career were Nebraska, Missouri, USC, Washington. In a way, sometimes was a breather for us, but at least back then. It was so neat because we all dedicated ourselves and said, look, we're going to go 12-0. We're not going to lose. Now, did we come close? Oh, yeah. LSU, 3-0. Yeah, 1 out of 4 field goals. Rain, cold. It was so foggy. I'll never forget. We had this little loop play out of the back. I threw it to a back that I couldn't even see.
You just thought he was there.
And I had no idea where it went. But that was the atmosphere. They had to put me in the hospital. Major me. It was just because I'd gotten so beat up, and I got where I was running the ball so much. Some games I'd run it 25 times a game. Then every time you pitch it, you're getting hit. So it was great. I set the single game rushing record, which still holds. I thought Milroe had beat it when he got to 190, but then he lost 5 yards on the next play. My kids call me, Dad, did they break
You're
your
not
record?
keeping score or anything, are you?
Yeah, of course. Hey, when you're 67, you definitely are keeping score.
Well, you had a great senior year, and I watched just today. I watched about a 21-minute highlight of the Arkansas game in the Sugar. And man, y'all watching your wishbone operate it's like a work of art. The whole offensive line had been together for so long, and man, between Major and Billy Jackson and you and Keith had a great game against Arkansas. Had some great catches, and the funny thing about Keith, Rick mentioned it. We had Keith on last year, and he said that anytime y'all called a pass play, the other team, the defense, knew it was going to be a pass play because he came out of the huddle turning somersaults. He knew he was going to get a pass, and man, you were on target that game, except for the one you overthrew on.
Yeah, he
On
won't live that down. But I was in the end zone. I told him, I said, Keith, you let me overthrow you. What else am I
yeah,
going to say? I was so amped up. I couldn't believe it. To this day, it still haunts me, because it should have been 6.
it would have been a 90-yard touchdown, right? It would have been a 90-yard touchdown.
Probably longer than that, because I was midway in the end zone when I threw it. We did a little fake, and then he did a Z in, and he was wide open.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Well,
That's crazy.
did you feel going into that year? Did you feel any additional pressure because of the fact that we had done so well the previous 2 years? I mean, what kind of pressure did you feel going into that?
Well, I won't say I felt additional pressure. I felt pressure. Because every year during my 3 years of playing, we were always ranked high. We knew we were going to win the SEC. But Coach Bryant instilled within us this thinking that it's not whether we were going to win, but it was how bad we were going to win. He'd let us have it. We might be up 21-0, and he'd just crawl. It'd be awful.
Hmm.
And then I've seen us struggling, and he'd knowing we were going to reamed out, and he'd say, "All right, guys, I think now we got them. We're going to make this happen." And when we were playing my sophomore year at Southern Cal, when they were 3-0 at half, they were number 1 in the country. He walked in there, and everybody was like, "Oh gosh!" And he goes, "Guys, got them right where we want them." And we went out and won the game 6-3. It was just amazing.
Well, Steadman, we talk about the old quote: "Fans remember the games, teammates remember the moments that don't always make the headlines." Beyond the games, what are the moments that you remember about your teammates that stand out from that '79 season?
I'll have to tell this story. We're playing LSU, and the week before against Mississippi State, I'd bruised my sternum real bad. And I was a sitting duck. You couldn't move. It was grass. It was mud. It was awful. And then they were just killing me. And I'll never forget, I was in the huddle, and I was going, I couldn't even breathe. And Steve Whitman looked over at me and goes, "You ain't going out of this game." He called the play. We go up there, and all I'd do is hand it off. But that was our team. We're down on the goal line. Mike Brock's on my left guard. I go, "Now." He goes, "Check 41. Black." That was our letter. 40. That's the kind of guys we had who they were so smart, they just, everybody knew their job, their responsibility. Everybody loved each other. This is a crazy thing. And most people, this probably shock everybody if you watch this. And most people don't realize the offense and defense hated each other. Literally. In fact, when best went against best, that's when the Reds went against the HHs. There were more fireworks than when we were playing for national titles. The coaches would get in fights. Everybody, you've never seen anything. That's why the best could not go against the best very often, or we would literally kill each other. But yet, somehow Coach Bryant molded us into a group of men that won. Rick, I don't know if I answered your question, but really that tells you about the teammates I had.
Yeah, it tells about the quality of the character off men that were around you, not just the physical ability, but the character. Andy, I'll say that about the defense and the offense hating each other, but brothers fight too, right? There's a camaraderie in that we may fight, but don't let anybody else pick on you. Don't let anybody else fight you, or we're going to be against you together. And that's what it sounds like you guys had.
Yeah. Hey, when the game's over, when the competition's not there, we're all like this. But when we hit the field, I've never
Well,
seen anything like it.
Stedman, you talked about your offensive line, and you see stories of the quarterback, especially in the NFL, taking the whole offensive line out to dinner. Where did you take your offensive line out to dinner in Tuscaloosa?
Hey, Brian Hall Dorm.
Yeah,
Hey,
a good choice.
that I would not take it. They were just a great group, and everybody been around. When you have 5-year guys that are starters, it's understands when you say a 5-year guy at Alabama, you've been through the fire.
Yeah.
Because most time you don't get to play for your first 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You're just trying to make it. And then you start playing and playing. That's why we were so good is that Coach Bryant always kept us loaded. We'd play. Everybody, every week, it wasn't like people are going to play. No, 60 will play the first half. And then by the time the second half's there, we keep bringing that wave of fresh guys.
Yeah.
It gave such effort because how much you were going to get to play. But the Jeter offense is rocking and rolling. Coach Bryant's going to leave you in there. And it can be in a tough situation, and if he decides to put you in. My senior year against Auburn, we're down 18-17. Third quarter. We're number 1 in the country. We're undefeated. Coach Bryant, first team offense. He took us all out. He put in the Jetters. Of course, they went 3 and out. But the next time we got in there, we drove it the length of the field and boom.
I heard Bruce Arians a few weeks ago on some show, and he was talking about his experience coaching with Coach Bryant. And one of the things he talked about Coach Bryant doing all the substituting and said nobody else substituted players. Coach Bryant was the only one that got guys in and out of the game. But he talked about that at that time I think they were down inside the 5-yard line, and he had the 4th string backfield in. And Bruce was basically cussing about why they were doing what they were doing, and they drove down the field, scored a touchdown, and he said he knows what he's doing. And it taught a young coach something. And so there's so much validity to that you guys were able to overwhelm opponents because just wave after wave after wave of tough players.
But also, not only are you overwhelming your opponent, but you're keeping your team sharp the whole year. Because we're playing Vanderbilt, and I run a 63-yard touchdown, and I could have racked up the yards. We played 5 quarterbacks that day. Of course, we beat them 63-3. But that was Coach Bryant.
Okay.
So, just taking another step back from football for a moment, what was the most meaningful non-football memory from your time at Alabama?
I think just getting to know Coach Bryant and getting to see what he was all about. And then to coach with him. And then I'll never forget, Coach Bryant and I were able to have a lot of spiritual talks together. And one day I walked in his office and he said, "Steadman, come here." He says, "You may not believe this, but there's never a time that I don't see somebody less fortunate that I don't pray for." That was Coach Bryant. Coach Bryant was tough and hard as he could be, had the biggest heart. And there were so many times he would go up the back steps and go into a room where somebody had cancer.
Is there any particular story that sticks out in your mind that you remember about an instance where he did something like that, really caught your attention?
One thing is that he'd say, "I want to take a walk with the quarterbacks." And we'd be out there having our walk with him when he goes over everything. And he talks. Some fan would be a bonehead and come up and want to not realize that wasn't the time. And he was always so gracious. Yeah. Always so gracious to that. And I just sat there and marveled because I've seen him not be very gracious with some of the players who were to a meeting, or he came down there and you'd have an All-American. He didn't feel like he was doing right, and he'd kick them in the fanny. And I could tell you some stories that would just blow your mind. That was Coach Bryant.
there anything he ever said off the field, like a life lesson or something that you look back at, that a crystallizing moment or one of those big things that you would want to share with folks?
We were getting ready to play Washington. It was on a Wednesday night. And Coach Bryant walked in. He goes, "What are you going to do when you go to work and on your there's a pink slip? And then you leave and you say, I better go to the bank, see what kind of money I have in there." You go to the bank and they say, "You don't have any money in here. Your wife came and got it all." And then on your way home, you're thinking, "Oh my gosh." You see smoke in the sky, and when you get there, your house is on fire. And then you find out your wife's left. Are you going to quit? What are you going to do? Now, that was a story he told us before the Washington. He'd come up with stories about, think about who you represent, your mamas and your papas and your Sunday school teachers and your coaches and your classmates. He'd just go on and on about all that. And he just made you really realize that you weren't there just for yourself.
Well, Steadman, after your playing days, you
went right into law school at Alabama and stayed on as a graduate assistant as you learned the other side of that, when you'd been there for 4 years as a player and now you were in the staff meetings. And that had to have been quite an experience for you, but you also had a little side gig in '82 as the host of the Bear Bryant Show. Now, I got to visit the set of the Bear Bryant Show in the fall of 1977 when Charlie Thornton was the host, or a co-host, I guess it was called, because obviously Coach Bryant was the host. But what was it like being around Coach Bryant in that setting? I guess it was still filmed at Channel 13 in Birmingham.
Yeah, we'd film it at 9 a.m. in the morning in Birmingham.
Yeah, and we're going to do a podcast on the Bear Bryant Show, and we want to get you back on.
Yeah, I'd love
to do some more stories about it, and I'm going to get some other folks who were involved in the production of the show. But tell us about the normal routine for the Sunday of the Bear Bryant Show.
Well, I'd get up there early and walk the halls for 30 minutes to calm down. And then I'm a 24-year-old kid co-hosting the Coach Bryant. And I'm sure I was terrible, but you really didn't have to do much. Coach Bryant would just keep talking. In fact, it'd be times they'd be going like this. They'd be counting it down, and then I'd be going, "Coach, Golden Flake, we'll see you next week." Coach Bryant still be talking. That's the beat. Everybody just loved that. And then sometimes he'd start coaching me while I was doing the Coach Bryant Show. He'd make sure you're holding the ball this way and doing this, and you just never knew what was going to happen on the Coach Bryant Show. In fact, I probably was the first person to know that he was going to retire. Mm-hmm. He walked in that Sunday morning, sat down, looked at me and said, "I'm going to retire." He said, "I'm losing my edge." He said, "To let Reggie Collier beat us running the ball," he said, "I'm just losing my edge." He announced it to the world he was going to retire. Of course, how would you like to do that show after that? It was something.
Growing up, when I was a teenager, Sunday afternoon after church, we'd have lunch, and then we'd play sandlot football in the neighborhood. And about 3:45, our sandlot football game would shut down, and everybody scattered back to their houses to watch the Bear Bryant Show at 4:00. And the ratings for it were better than the NFL ratings. And I think Channel 13 probably preempted NFL games to show it. And then the Jordan Show was right after that, back in the 70s. But it was such an iconic show. And the things he would say, and the Golden Flake, and the whole Coca-Cola thing, and him and Charlie Thornton going back and forth. And it was just classic television. Do you remember a specific episode or a moment that happened that made you laugh or smile or anything?
I can't really think of anything in particular, except he would always come up with a little phrases like, "Bingo, that's a goodie," or he'd say, he just out of the blue say stuff that he liked. what's going on. And then if he didn't like something, he says, we better work on that next week. We're going to have to. But he was so unpolished that he was polished, if that makes any sense. That was just him. He didn't care. He was all about winning and being the best you could be and winning the fourth quarter. And he just understood all that. And that was his philosophy. And it came out in the show. It just.
Well, what the viewers didn't realize, when the game was over Saturday, a production crew would take the whole game film and they'd spend practically all night back then chopping that film up and showing the highlights. And for him to see it for the first time and not really may have had a play-by-play sheet with him. I don't know how he did it in such a short time. Do you recall how he was able to do what he did from a...
Yeah, but he was so quick-minded that he could just he could take it and run with it. He'd been doing it so long. He was just a master.
Steadman, that was an interesting experience for you from coming out from under the helmet and being out there on television as a 24-year-old. What did you learn about Alabama fans and their relationship to Alabama football? Any funny stories running into people on the street where it really, you had that moment with people and it was as a media person or media personality?
Well, there's no greater fans than Alabama fans. And you just, they love Alabama football. And they're, I can't tell you some of the things I've signed. And the only thing I quit signing was people's skin. You know what I'm saying? But they wanted you to sign skin, but it didn't make any difference. And but they just love their football. I mean, that's just, there's nobody like them.
Well, I think, for those of us that have grown up around as fans, and I mean, coming from a family that was, I didn't know anything any different. And Alabama football always has been about family and community as much as it's been about championships. You talked about your family and the legacy and with Alabama and Alabama Law School. How does that truth play out in your family and in your journey with the part that the university plays?
Well, I mean, I was always a huge Alabama fan. I mean, I cried when, the punt, Bama punt. I'll never forget it. I was playing basketball, listening. Of course, everybody listened on the radio. Right. And then when we lost to Notre Dame, and then when Nebraska embarrassed us, and, you just, golly, as a kid growing up, and then my parents went to the university. My aunt and uncle went to the university. My granddad went to the university. And so and my sister was a Bear girl. But, I was looking at it more from, golly, if I go to Alabama, I may not ever get to play. And I'll tell you this quick story, but y'all got to hear this because you hear it. But I'll never forget when I was coaching, one day we walked out of a meeting and I was thinking to myself, I wonder what they said about me in this meeting. Because, I mean, it was pretty brutal. And so I'll never forget Bobby Marks and Dee Powell and Mal Moore. They said, hey, Mal, why don't you tell Steadman what you said about him in this meeting? Mal's face turned just red as a beet. And why don't you tell him that you said, well, we'll take Steadman, but we'll never win a national championship with him. And then we're having the Wishbone boys down in, Orange Beach, the reunion, and there was a coach there that right when I got there, but he said, yeah, Steadman, I'll never forget talking about you at the staff meeting, and they said, well, we'll take this Shealy kid. He'll be good for our locker room. We know he'll never play, but he'll be real good for our locker room. So that's what they were saying about me, because I wondered why it was so hard for me to kind of break in. One, my coach left, and then I learned that the coach that recruits you is pushing you. It makes them look better. Because Coach Bryant would hold them all accountable. And I'm sitting there going, I wonder, all that. The one person that was my ally, which was the best person, was Coach Bryant. He was the one that stood up for me. That's probably how I got to play. Coaches are going to play, and when you recruited all the quarterbacks we had, can you imagine having 9 scholarship quarterbacks? One of them being Jeff Rupp. All the rest of them were great. Of course, some of them got moved to things, but
That's
it was
great. Well, Steadman, when you compare your era to today, what's the biggest difference you see in the Alabama program?
we were more physical. All you got to do is watch film when we played and watch it now. But a lot of that's rules. And we were all about the university and that's all we cared about. It was about the whole and not the one. That was a big difference. And just a whole, I can't even compare pay. When I was there, the premise was to make the student athlete just like every other student. And I was on the long range planning committee for the NCAA. I was one of 2 student athletes on the committee. And there was USC's AD, Notre Dame's AD. We had 3 or 4 presidents. And they were promoting, we want the student athlete to just be like students. And I asked them this question. I said, okay, if they have an academic scholarship, they get the same thing I get. Did they have to work 60 hours a week? And that's not even on your academics. And they could never answer that question. But I think all that led to where we are. Of course, back when I played, there wasn't any rules about how many hours you can practice. It was 6.5 days a week.
Hours a week.
I can't even fathom that.
You had that in about 3 days, didn't you?
It was crazy. And then our 2-day practices, we'd be up at 5 and practice and then go try to lay down. You were so sore and beat. Then you'd practice again, and then you'd have meetings again, and then you'd start over and over and over and over. And then you're out there killing each other. So quarterbacks, we did wear yellow, so we weren't hit sometimes. But when you were young like I was, I got all my hits real early, believe me. It made us all tough. We just played tough football. You can ask anybody that played our defenses. Here's what was unreal. We played all these great schools, but the best defense in America was the Alabama defense. I feared them more than I did. The only one that ever came close was Penn State my junior year. They were really good.
Tell me what Major said, that Penn State was by far the best team that y'all played his time there.
Yeah, we were great.
Steadman, how do you want to be remembered, whether as a quarterback or the host of the Bear Bryant show or just part of the Alabama family? What comes to mind first about how you hope people remember you?
I hope they remember me as somebody that loved God, has a personal relationship with Jesus, worked hard, loved the university, and was about the whole and not the one.
It's a good word.
Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're a huge part of the Alabama story and incredibly thankful. That 79 team is absolutely my favorite team. It's what made me a football fan. I'm incredibly grateful to you because that was the beginning of an incredible journey. And incredibly grateful for Thaddeus' example of following Christ in the middle of that. And as a young man, that was a big deal to see too. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Steadman. And to our listeners, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. We've got more great interviews coming up here on the Crimson Chronicles podcast.
And folks, we're really proud to partner with Yay Alabama, the official NIL collective of the Crimson Tide. Their new structure makes it easier than ever for fans to support players directly through shout-outs, experiences, and exclusive content. Check it out at yayalabama.com.
And don't forget your Tidal towel The rally towel of the Crimson Tide. Pick up one today at whitwillsports.com, WHITWIL sports.com, and use the code TWO for a special Crimson Chronicles discount.
Well, folks, we will see you next time on the Crimson Chronicles podcast, and we're going to close out. And Steadman, if you'll go with us on this, the way we do every episode with a big Roll Tide. Roll Tide.
I can handle that.
There you go. Roll Tide.
All right, everybody, that'll do it for this episode of the Crimson Chronicles podcast, where we remember the moments and the men who built Alabama football. Before we go, a big thank you to our partners who help make this show possible. First, our friends at Title Towel by Whitwill Sports, the official sideline towel of champions. Whether you're in Bryant-Denny or watching from home, rep the Tide with a Title Towel and keep that Bama pride in front and center. Grab yours today at whitwillsports.com. That's WHITWIL sports.com. And don't forget to use the code TWO at checkout for a special Crimson Chronicles listeners discount. And of course, Yay Alabama, the official NIL collective of the University of Alabama. Your support connects fans directly to players, giving them the chance to share stories, experiences, and shout outs that make the Crimson Tide family even stronger. Join the team at yay-alabama.com and become part of the future of Alabama athletics. I'm Rick Morton. Thanks for listening. And as always, Roll Tide.